As a child, did you ever experience a traumatic event that impacted you for years to come? Our guest today shares a transparent and vulnerable story from when he was a child about public speaking. And this was something that he overcame, but it took him almost 25 years. As a renowned national speaker now, he shares this story, along with many other stories, in a heartfelt, profound way. You would never know that he struggled to speak in front of people for so long because of that moment as a child in the classroom. You will hear this story, and one of the takeaways that I hope you think about is words matter. They may be little words to us, but to the person hearing them or receiving them, it may impact the trajectory of their lives. We're going to talk about speaking confidently, telling stories that bring that emotional connection to the audience. We're going to talk about life pivots. We're going to talk about resilience. Let's join the conversation with Michael Davis.
On today's episode of the GST Factor podcast, I'm honored to have Michael Davis. Hi, Michael. How are you today?
Doing well, Misha. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. You and I are connected through our association and membership with the National Speakers Association and specifically our Kentucky chapter. So a shout out to our fellow NSA and Kentucky members. So, Michael, you are certainly one of the experts in our field from a speaking perspective and sharing that knowledge, nationally, but then also with the local chapters. But I really want to have our listeners hear a little bit about your story today.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. My expertise started on a desk in first grade. I was in trouble for breaking a class rule one day, which was that I had jumped on a desk during recess. It was indoor recess. I was bored. I thought, I'll get up and entertain my friends. They loved it. My teacher didn't. So she walked in the room and she said, well, Michael, since you love getting so much attention, I'm going to let you stand on your desk during nap time. Oh, okay. So there I am 2 hours later. Lights are off in the classroom. All the kids are resting their heads on their desk. But do you think they were sleeping? No, they were silently taunting me. And after a few minutes, all I could think was, I just want to get down. I'll be good. I'll never be bad again. Just let me get down. And that went on for 40 minutes. So when my teacher finally said, you can get down now, I hope you've learned your lesson. Oh, I had. Don't ever stand in front of people again. That was awful. So I went from loving the spotlight to never wanting to stand in front of people again because I was publicly humiliated. And that stayed with me for 25 years until I was a financial advisor and I was voluntold, hey, you're going to be doing seminars and workshops to bring in new business. If you can imagine, that was a disaster. I was not good at all because I was terrified. I didn't remember the first grade incident when that happened, but it was so deep in my subconscious that I had that message. You're going to be humiliated. You're going to be embarrassed. And finally, it got so bad, my boss pulled me into his office one day and said, well, here's the bottom line. You're a lousy speaker. Your stories suck. And if you don't get this turned around, we're going to have to let you go. So now I had to face a bigger fear of losing my job versus figuring out this speaking thing, which led me to Toastmasters back in 1994. And ultimately the National Speakers Association. Here's what I discovered, Misha. Everybody, we are all wired to be afraid of speaking because our earliest ancestors, if you got embarrassed, humiliated, or otherwise ostracized, it meant death, right? You were out of the tribe. So it's in us to be afraid of standing in front of groups because there's that great fear of being publicly humiliated, which, by the way, is the biggest fear we have. It's not public speaking. We are terrified at a deep level of being humiliated, embarrassed, because that means we're being kicked out of the group, right? It's not true in modern society, but that's how we're wired to think. And we are also afraid of walking in front of groups of strangers. Most people are. So when you combine the two, the potential for public humiliation along with fear of walking in front of strangers, that's public speaking, right? So it's not the speaking part, it's the potential response that we're afraid of. Well, I discovered this over the years, and eventually I discovered, hey, I can actually do this fairly well. I just had to have the right people teaching me along the way, like, as you mentioned, all of our cohorts in NSA. And one day people started coming to me and asking for help. And I thought, well, I think I could do this as a coach. And that's where the coaching was born, because I realized they had the same fears I did, and I could work them through that and not take 25 or more years to figure it out like it took me. So that's how I got here. I would love to say that I was born with a silver tongue, but that would be a lie. It was a painful journey to get to where I am.
So what I so appreciate about your story is two things. First of all, the transparency and the vulnerability, and I think the sharing of that. And I think that there's two lessons. Number one, you are a phenomenal storyteller. You hooked the audience. You immediately engage with a story, which is some of the techniques that I've personally learned from you through our trainings and our interactions at our NSA events. And I think that that's really important. And it's something I even share with my own mentees as I am mentoring other business individuals, especially entrepreneurs, as they're pitching, because it's important to jump straight in to those stories to really engage that audience and make that emotional connection. But the other lesson that I think is really important for all of us to hear, especially those of us that I have tiny humans, I have two tiny humans myself, is the influence and the impact we can have on children at such a young age. And, what would have happened if you hadn't ever found your voice and hadn't ever found your confidence later in life?
Mm-hmm.
The world, would not have Michael Davis, speaker, coach, etc. And I think that as there are parents out there listening, I think as there are educators and bosses listening, I think it's really important that our words matter, our words carry weight, and those experiences. Think how differently your life would have been if your teacher had encouraged and navigated and channeled your gifts and talents and confidence in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those are the two takeaways that I have.
Those are excellent observations. And now I will tell you, I have a different view on both my teacher and my boss, because they did at the time. Well, she put me on that desk and my boss said, "You're a lousy speaker." At the time, it was painful. However, I couldn't be more grateful for them today. Mm-hmm. And as you get older and you go through life, it's like those were turning point moments. And yes, if she had nurtured me, maybe I would have become a speaker, or maybe I wouldn't have.
Right.
Right. Who knows? It's that old sliding doors concept. Right? You just go through one door and take one path, and you go through a door, maybe take another. But I'm grateful to them is the bottom line, because they eventually forced me to take a look at a tough situation, a difficult time in my life, and do something about it. And
you
that's
pivoted. You made a positive pivot. And we, with the GSD Factor Life, we talk a lot about looking at life with a half glass full. And I think how you looked at that situation, and it's not necessarily what happened in the midst of the situation, but it's what you did after the situation. It's what you did with that experience that has now propelled you forward. And I think so many individuals at times go through a situation like that, and they're faced with the crossroads, right? They're faced with, do you go right or do you go left with this? And I think we, in the attribute of being inquisitive, we are constantly looking at we can learn something from everything. And we can learn what to do, or we can learn what not to do. And there's always two choices. And I think that your two experiences, both with the teacher and with your boss, is truly a testament to you took that and you said, I'm gonna make this positive pivot, and it's gonna make me better, and it's gonna make me stronger, which really ties into our resilience attribute too.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell you, the biggest reason I tell this story is because, yes, eventually I did start speaking, but there was always this little voice in the back of my head that said, you should be a speaker. Once I discovered that, yeah, we're all afraid, and I got through all that, it still took me over 25 more years to decide I'm going to do this full time, because I was always held back by other insecurities and fears. And finally, when I was 55 years old, I came to a decision point. I was a financial advisor, and I was a good financial advisor. I liked it, didn't love it, didn't have a passion for it. I had a passion for speaking since the first time I sat in an audience and watched a speaker make 400 men and women cry from laughter. And I thought I would love to do that. But then that other voice came in and said, oh, no, you haven't done that. You're a new dad. You're this and that. I had every reason not to do it. And I talked myself out of it as far as going for it as a career. But in the background, I was constantly studying and learning, going to Toastmasters. But there came a decision point when I was 55 where I had to say, either do it or don't, but do not have regrets. So I jumped full time in 2018, and here comes a pandemic, which turns out to have been a benefit to my business, selfishly speaking for a moment, because I've had great mentors along the way. And one of the tasks my mentors gave me in 2017, they said, you're going to start hosting our virtual weekly workshops. And I said, no, I'm not. And they said, oh, yes, you are. There's this cool application called Zoom. Never heard of that. What is it? And they explained it. And I could not have known, Misha, they were doing me a huge favor by getting me ready for a pandemic for 3 years by becoming proficient virtually.
Yes.
And when the pandemic hit, I knew from all my networking and talking with people, people are going to lose their minds thinking about, I've got to go do this virtually now. I don't know how to do that. My business was very strong because of that. So the point of that is, you never know when you have a mentor who tells you to do something because they can see what you can't. You never know what benefits that will reap later on. And that's part of that resilience. It's just sticking with it.
Oh, amazing nuggets. You and I are very much out there in our networks and in our businesses. And I think, we both get a lot of conversations of, oh, you're a speaker. I want to be a speaker. And I think people think, oh, you just get up on stage, or you just get on a Zoom and you just do it. And I think that there's this misconception of, no, there's a lot of work that takes place for you. You talked about the 25 years of honing the craft, and let's talk a little bit more about this, because I think that, our listeners today are individuals that probably all need to speak in some capacity. Our entrepreneurs need to be pitching their products and services and their businesses. Business owners are having to either talk to their employees or talk to boards or what have you, or there may be other fellow speakers listening. Let's spend a little time on talking about what is the work that needs to take place to become a really proficient, successful speaker.
That's a terrific question. And it all starts with what I used to call the American Idol problem. And now we call it what, America's Got Talent, or whatever the newest shows are. There is a misconception, which I think was created by American Idol, that you can go get in a contest, practice for a few weeks, and become great. I saw a lot of people in that musical field do that. And I've been a music fan my whole life, and I know the stories of bands who got in vans and old broken down buses and traveled for years. Now, what does this have to do with speaking? It's a parallel concept. You do not get up and give a speech a couple times and get good. It is a sacrifice. You have to give up those times, that socializing, sometimes some family time, to go stand in a room by yourself and talk out loud to the walls and to your dogs and whoever. It's repetition. It's like the person who becomes a great athlete. We don't see LeBron James all the hours. I mean, the thousands of hours he put in, or Caitlin Clark, was a superstar college player from Iowa. We don't see all the work they put in. They just make it look easy. Actors are the same way. You got to get in there and do it. You cannot shortcut your way to becoming a great speaker. It takes a lot of mistakes and feedback, which is it's critical. You got to get feedback from people who are qualified to help show you how to get better. And it's not easy. It's not fun. But if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to put in the time and work off of a structure, a speech or story structure, and create a logical sequence and practice, get feedback, go over and over again, I promise you, you will stand out because most people will never do that.
It's so true. And I think one of my favorite nuggets from one of your trainings is the pregnant pause and how you have to when you are trying to get a point across, you're trying to lure the audience in. And I actually used it with my third grader because she was having to do a speech in front of her class. And I said to her, all right, you're at the end of this sentence, before you bring in the big crescendo moment, you're going to pause and you're going to count to 5. And she goes, really? And I was like, yes. And sure enough, her teacher reached out and she was like, she did such a great job. She like had us in there and then she paused. And I thought, oh no, she forgot. She goes, but she was just bringing us in a little bit more. So share with everyone your philosophy around that and that, that quick speech tip, because I think it's such an important one. And I think in today's society, there's this thought that we have to fill space and we have to fill time, and there's not enough breathing room and there's not enough silence. So talk to us a little bit about that little tidbit.
No, here's the problem. I can't because your story's awesome. Oh, that is so cool. I love that. And it underscores. Here's the problem with silence. You brought up a really good point. Technology has made it almost impossible for us to experience silence. It's counterintuitive because we're talking about speaking and talking, right? It's counterintuitive, but the most valuable part of your presentation is the silence. Now, why is it counterintuitive? Because we think it's our words that move people and persuade them. It's not. What persuades and moves people is the silence after we say those words, so they can take them and integrate them into their thought process and think, how does that apply to me? And the longer we pause, the more we allow them to create a mental movie that shows them applying your product, service, or idea into their world and having a better life. It doesn't make sense logically, but it absolutely is. And we also are telling ourselves when we're up there in front of 150, however many pairs of eyes, oh my gosh, if I don't say something, I'm going to lose their attention and they're going to be thinking about their phones. When the opposite is true, the more you keep talking, and if you keep talking like this and you're just talking, and giving information and data and facts and figures, you're telling stories and all, their brains are shutting down. It's, I can't take anymore. And they look to the phone for distraction. A rhythmic pace, asking a question, pausing, making a key point, pausing, saying something funny and letting them laugh. That is what works most of all. And I've been on a bit of every so often I go through a new concept that I really start hammering my clients with, Misha. And the latest is born from a book called Subtract. If you're an entrepreneur listening to this applies to you as an entrepreneur and a speaker. The idea of subtract is we are basically wired to try to solve problems by adding more tasks, making the problem more, or the situation more complex. Well, research is showing that we need to start taking parts out of our projects, start taking parts out of our calendar. And it's parallel with speaking and storytelling. One of my tasks that I give all my clients now is to take a look at their script. their story and ask the question for each part, if I took this out, how would it impact the effectiveness of my speech? And more often than not, we find that we're creating a group of ruthless editors, right? And it's hard to do this because you're in love with your own material. We all are, right? We know our material. And that's why it's so important to get a qualified pair of eyes to help you with this, who can help you be ruthless. Because what audiences today do not forgive is boring material. And that's why we have to edit it down. And that enables us to work in more pauses and silence. One of the things about coaching when people come to me is they've got 150 slide PowerPoints put together, and they're going to give people everything they know in 30 minutes. And it's like, no. Here's the thing. We don't need new information as audiences, because there's nothing you can tell me that I can't run to my phone and get faster than you'll give it to me. What I want as an audience is your perspective, your insight, your wisdom about that topic. And that's where storytelling becomes so powerful, because it's the one asset you have. Again, if you're an entrepreneur, you're not the only one who sells the product you sell. But what you do have that no one else has is your story and your experience. Nobody can go to market with you on that one.
Such amazing nuggets in all of what you're sharing. And what I love about Subtract, which by the way, I'm an Audible girl, because I do a lot of, my kids call me Moober, mommy Uber, because we're, especially when we're in sports seasons, and so there's lots of running around. So I love listening to my Audible as a way, and the kids listen to it as well. And I think that that's really good, even at their young ages. But what I love about that concept of Subtract is there's a parallel to the fashion world, like when you're putting on an outfit and it says, always take something off. But I think back to when I was writing my 3 books, and same thing, my book coach, my editor-in-chief, and my other editor were constantly pushing and stretching me, saying, we don't need this. We don't need that. And at first it was painful, because it was my information. It was my data. It was my story. But I trusted them. And through that process, it has been more impactful, because there's less words on there, or there's one less story. And when we actually started, as we were going through that process, my editor said to me, we're going to cut it out of the book, but this is your story to share from stage, or this is your story to share from your workshop. It doesn't all have to be in there. And so we actually started building a library of stories that I use and leverage in workshops only, or in speeches only. And so that way it's new and fresh, and it's not necessarily in print. And I think that concept of subtracting is so important in this day and age, that it can be used in all of our facets of life.
Oh, terrific point. And I've got, like the story I told about standing on the desk, I've got a much longer version I will tell in a keynote or a workshop to help people understand all the intricacies. On an interview like this, it doesn't work. I've tried it. And ask me how I know. I watched the video and it's like, oh gosh, I lost them. So you've got to know when to use it. But you're right. It's creating that bank of stories. Now, I used to have clients create what I call the story bank, right? Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, maybe have an alarm go off and say, what happened today that would go into my story bank? I've now changed that suggestion, because we don't remember stories as much as we remember moments. We build the story around the moments. So now what I have people do, and I'm going to suggest, if you're listening to this, create a moments file. What happened today? And you don't have to write it all out. Just grab your phone, create a file, and just wrote, backed into my neighbor's car, right? That's all you need to know. Blew the sale with Mr. Jones. You know all the details. Just put that in. And as you go through time and you start to get good at speaking and determining, okay, I need a story here, a story there. Go back to that file and say, that moment, I can create a story that will support this point.
Mhm. Oh, amazing. I'm gonna go reframe my own story bank to a moment bank. I think that's fantastic. So, Michael, when we think about the GSD factor life of be confident, inquisitive, imaginative, present, resilient, and influential, when you think about you and your life, you have shared with us moments and stories that really have touched on many of the attributes. But what is that one attribute that really is resonating for you?
Anti-perfection. I see it with my clients. I was guilty of this for years. And what I love about GSD is it involves action.
Yes.
Right? The best speakers, the best sales professionals, the best entrepreneurs, they get in there and they start taking action. Because as opposed to when I was a young guy in my 20s and I was thinking about entrepreneurs and running a business, I thought that people created a plan and it just fell into place. Well, it took me about 5 minutes starting a business to realize, oh, that doesn't work. Get in there and get bruised and bloodied. There's that old President Theodore Roosevelt. It wasn't a quote; it was more of a story or something he told about the man in the arena. Change it to modern day, the person in the arena. That's the one who gets it done, who GSDs it, right? It gets that shit done because they're willing to make mistakes and not see it as failure. But it's like, look, I know this sounds cliche, but it is true. Sometimes we got to strip it down to the basic elements. Keep taking action. I tell people, get out there, tell that story, get that speech out there. No, it's not going to be perfect. People don't want perfection. They want connection. Now, you don't want to be making the same mistake over and over every 30 seconds. Then they will go to their phones. But if they see that you're up there genuinely sharing your experience and that you are there for the right reason, embrace the mistakes. It's like I said, I now embrace and have for years my teacher and my boss who told me how lousy I was or put me in an embarrassing situation because it forced me to become better.
Yes.
And I raised my son. He's now 28. I would tell him over and over again, I want you to fall down in life.
Mhm.
I will be there behind you to help pick you up, but that's the only way I'm going to be able to, you're going to be able to walk out of this house someday and have the strength to do this.
What I love about that is it really, we have a lot of sub attributes in the GSD factor life, and you've touched on so many of them, which is great because we talk about that concept of progress, not perfection, and continuing to show up and trying and failing fast and pausing and reevaluating and pivoting and relaunching, right? Because you fail forward. And I think that is a concept, as a recovering perfectionist myself, right? Those were concepts that I really had to grasp and really had to battle and struggle with over the course of my own life. And I think that, especially as speakers, entrepreneurs, or anyone in their field, I think there is this concept, and we've talked about a little bit today, that you just kind of wake up and you do, but you actually have to keep working. You have to keep showing up. You have to keep making that incremental progress. And when it's hard, you just push a little harder. And I think that is really a concept that, the world and the entrepreneurs and people in this society, I think, have maybe lost and forgotten a little bit.
Well, those are all terrific points. I want to add something. This just occurred to me, and I agree with everything you've said about we got to push, fail forward, push, keep going on. Here's the problem I see missing from all of that advice. And this just occurred to me. We need to also acknowledge when something goes wrong. We got to stop and say, you know what? That really sucks.
Yes.
Because if we don't, we feel it starts to make us feel like there's something wrong with us because we have to acknowledge the emotional response to a I'm very careful with the word failure. I don't believe in failure. At least it's not permanent. But we also have to be willing to say, I just put 6 months of my life into this project and it didn't work the way I wanted. This is awful. This sucks. Just don't
Be in the
wallow.
feels.
Yeah,
Be in the feels.
yeah, that's right. Just don't wallow in it.
Right.
Set aside, and the most successful people I've met who do this say, I'm going to set aside a day, 6 hours, whatever it is. I'm going to wallow in it and then I'm going to let it go. I'm going to put it in a box over here.
Yes.
And then if I occasionally need to go back to it, that's fine. But I'm just going to put it over there and go do what I need to do next and say, all right, what can I learn from that experience?
What I love and appreciate about your point is this is why progress, not perfection, actually is a sub-attribute of our be present, because the idea is that you are present, you are present when it's going good and you are present when it's gone bad, and you sit in it and say, you're right, it sucked and it doesn't feel good, but where I'm going to give it that space, I'm going to give those feels, I'm going to, be in that moment, but then I'm not going to wallow, as you shared, and I'm going to continue to press forward. And I think that that was why why I wanted to put progress and not perfection to be present, because it's being present in those moments throughout the journey.
Well, this may be the most important concept that you are preaching, and that is the feel the feels. I'm very concerned. I'm 60, and I've watched a radical shift in our society where it seems like the message that's getting out there is don't feel. Look, I'm not going to go off on a tangent here, but I think it's a big reason you have a major drug problem in our country, because we've been taught that it's, don't feel it, push through it, be tough. Look, I agree. You gotta be persistent to succeed, but occasionally embrace your humanness and say, you know what? I just don't feel it today. It's okay. You're not a machine. I've had to deal with this, by the way. I'm not preaching. This is a big struggle for me. Ever so often, my partner, Linda, she says, you've got to take some time off. You're pushing yourself. Yep, I am. So find that person in your life who will acknowledge, yes, you need to be persistent and keep going for it. But at the same time, occasionally take your foot off the gas.
Absolutely. And I think that in this go, go, go society, there is less of pause and have what I like to call work-life family integration. Because I think everything, I personally don't care for the whole work-life balance, because it's not really balanced, but I like to use work-life family integration. But, having just come off of a spring break trip. And normally we don't, as a family, take a spring break trip. This was a new thing for us. But we talked about as a family that we want to actually start to integrate more fun. And so we now talk about, what does that work-life family fun integration look like? And I think that's it's those pauses and those moments to rest and recharge and because everything's got to shut down, just like our laptops and our phones, they need a reboot. I think our lives and our brains and our everything needs that reboot moment.
I love that concept. Work-life family integration. You're right. And I know the studies are out there. I don't know where to send people, but there is the balance idea is a myth. It can't happen, because there are times your family needs your full attention, 100%, maybe an illness. Sometimes your business needs it. Well, by definition, you're out of balance. That's not a bad thing. Just don't stay out of balance. That's the issue. When can I let go of the business because this crisis has now been overcome? Well, we can get back to balance. But it all comes to communication. Now, I've been speech coaching now for 14 years and storytelling coaching, but my business, the central premise is that everything is all about crystal clear communication, even though I didn't say that very clearly. Crystal clear communication. Miscommunication is the number one source of every problem we deal with. If you can trace them all back to somebody says something like, I thought you meant this. Nope. Well, whose fault is that? We didn't clearly communicate. And that's why speaking and storytelling can be your most valuable tools, because you set up clear communication, you get expectations. It just makes such a huge difference.
All right. I'm asking all my guests this year, what are you powerfully choosing, Michael Davis, in 2024?
Saying no more consistently. I got very focused this year on a concept that I didn't invent, but I've taken and made my own. It's this concept of storytelling abs. It's a storytelling structure. That's my focus this year, along with speaking. I say no to a lot more projects than I ever did before this year. And I do it in a respectful way, because I'm respecting the fact that I know I can't serve the person asking me to do that, or if it doesn't fit in my value system, or whatever. There are many reasons. It's the most valuable gift you can give yourself, is to learn to say no. Now, here's a really cool idea on top of that I just heard 2 weeks ago. Wish I'd invented this. Woman said, anytime I say no to, let's say, an event. I had this recently with somebody wanted me to speak in July, and I just didn't feel it fit me, and I couldn't work it into my calendar. So I now put that event on my calendar. And when it shows up in July and I see that I'm not doing that event and I'm instead doing something else I wanted to do, that's a really good feeling. I thought that was brilliant.
That's a great tip.
It's a brilliant idea. I can't remember her name, but she said it gives me a boost of adrenaline or dopamine or whatever to realize I would have been doing this today and I would not be happy. And
it's that boost of validation that said, I trusted my gut. I listened and I said no respectfully. And no is a complete sentence, especially to the ladies out there. But I love that retrospect, right? To say, oh, I could have been at this and that wouldn't have been right. Because the thing is, it may not have felt right in the moment for you now, but there may have been something else down the road that comes in between between now and then, that you go, oh, if I had said to that, I wouldn't have had space. I wouldn't have had the capacity for that, for what I was supposed to do or where I was supposed to be.
Yeah. Here's the other point about that I really like, is that it will reinforce your willingness to say no the next time, because when you go through that emotional experience, when you're on that day of the calendar, it's like, oh, I would have been doing that and I'd be miserable. Wow. Saying no does really have power. You're going to have stronger emotional muscles next time when somebody says, gives you an offer and you're like, no, I don't want to do this.
Awesome. This podcast has been so fun. Thank you so much. So many tidbits, and I'm actually personally excited to go back and listen to it and take notes and share it with so many others. Michael, what is the best way that our listeners can get in touch with you? Should they want to, look for some speaking coaching? Maybe it's just learning about the speaking world a little bit more. Maybe they want to have you as a guest. Sure. What's the best way for them to connect to you?
Best ways to reach out and just contact me, email mike@speakingcpr.com, or feel free to visit my website, speakingcpr.com.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you to our listeners. And don't forget to get shit done.
Thanks for listening to the GSD Factor podcast. If you liked this episode, please rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, where you can also find previous episodes. Let's also connect on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you're looking for more information on the GSD Factor, visit us at gsdfactor.com. And always remember to GSD, get shit done.